HQ presented by Jeep, and let's look at the top 10 NBA draft prospects at CBSSports.com. The draft is on Thursday. We've done draft comps for the top 5 players on this list: Banchero, Holmgren, Smith, Ivy, and Sharp. Let's comp the guys on the right side of this list, beginning with Keegan Murray, who right now is the favorite to go number 5 overall. Kyle Boone and Adam Finkelstein joining us here with draft comps ahead of Thursday's draft. Let's start, Kyle, with Keegan Murray, who had no major offers at all coming out of high school and now is a lottery pick.
Yeah, that's right. This is a guy who's really emerged on the scene over the last year. Last year kind of took a back seat, obviously, to Luka Garza, who was the best player in college basketball. What did he do this past season for Iowa? He was the best player in college basketball, arguably, maybe behind Oscar Tshiebwe. This is a guy who reminds me of Jeremy Grant. He's really good in transition, can create his own offense in post-up situations, is able to make second chance opportunities, crashing the offensive glass. Similar size, similar frame as Jeremy Grant, similar defensive profile, though I really like Keegan Murray's defensive potential. I think he has a chance to be a special defensive player at the 4 spot. The comps go a little bit farther too. I think both can space the floor at a really high level. We saw Jeremy Grant kind of emerge as a really quality NBA producer because his shot over the years has really developed and been really reliable. That's something I think Keegan Murray will instantly bring to the table on offense. He was one of the most dynamic outside shooters in college basketball last season. I think that will translate. That's kind of why I like the Jeremy Grant comp here for Keegan Murray.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more in the Tobias Harris camp. I think that Murray comes in as a versatile forward, probably the most underestimated part of his game as it translates to the next level is his post game. In fact, the majority of his offense at Iowa came in the post. He's a guy who can score without needing to have a whole lot of plays run for him. He excels at knowing how to seal his defender. Got a terrific left hand, and of course he's got that shooting range as well. So when I was thinking about combo forwards with an inside-out game who could stretch the floor, who could play with their back to the basket, Tobias Harris, you see this kind of play right here. That's the type of offense that I think we're going to be able to expect from Keegan Murray. So that's why I went with the Tobias Harris comparison.
Interesting. So a former Piston and a current Piston are the comps for Keegan Murray, who is a favorite to go to the Pistons at number 5 overall. Let's move on to A.J. Griffin as we continue our draft comps. Adam, this is a guy who could be one of 3 Duke players to go in the lottery, maybe even top 10.
Yeah, and I wrestled with this one, and Kyle and I have different opinions on A.J. Griffin. I went with Gary Trent, and Gary Trent is a big-bodied shot maker, but he comes from a similar pedigree, and that was a part of the comparison for me because his dad played in the NBA, so he had that high profile coming up the ranks. He had a big body early on in his high school days, just like A.J. Griffin, and then evolved into a shooter. People don't realize that Gary Trent Jr. was not necessarily an elite shot maker when he was younger. And I tell you what, A.J. Griffin wasn't either. That's the thing most people don't realize is that the high school version of A.J. Griffin was vastly different from what we saw this season. He was more athletic and nowhere near the shot makers. So that's why I've got Gary Trent, but I'm pretty sure that Kyle may have somebody different.
No, I like the Gary Trent comp there. I went with Harrison Barnes as my comp. Both are really excellent spot-up shooters. Last season, A.J. Griffin was arguably the best wing shooter in all of college basketball. He's got a really reliable three-point shot, hit 44.7% from the three-point line. He's a really smart cutter, a guy who I think is going to be a really good role player in the NBA. I think both Harrison Barnes and A.J. Griffin, below average defensive players. So I think the knock with A.J. Griffin and why we're not talking about him as a top 5 player in this draft is he was able to get blown by a lot of times on the defensive end of the floor against competition arguably that had no business blowing by A.J. Griffin, especially given his profile as a former 5-star recruit, a guy who we thought would maybe be in contention to be the number 1 pick in this draft class. So, the questionable lateral quickness, I think, Finkelstein mentioned it earlier. He had some injuries in high school. You have to hope that some of that athleticism will come back to him as he goes forward into the NBA. I think that's the huge question mark. But the Harrison Barnes trajectory, that's a really solid player. it's also maybe not someone who you want to take with the top 5 to 8 pick. And so that's, I think, what teams are probably wrestling with right now. Where do they take AJ Griffin? Because he's got star power and star potential, but the athleticism, the defense, I think there's some real question marks here.
And that's probably why his over-under draft position right now is not in the top 10. It's at 11.5 for AJ Griffin. Let's move on to Benedict Mathurin as we continue to comp some of our top players for the NBA draft on Thursday. Kyle, you can start with this one.
Yeah, I'm going with Malik Monk. This is a guy who, Malik Monk, coming out of Kentucky, was, billed kind of as a 3-and-D wing. He's a really good sharpshooter at Kentucky. Had some games where he just absolutely annihilated the box score, went off for 30 and 40 points, was able to kind of carry that Kentucky team in spurts on the offensive end, and reminds me a little bit of Benedict Mathurin. This is a guy who, coming in, he's kind of a 3-and-D prospect, can get a shot off really quick, has the length, I think, to eventually be a plus defender in the NBA. Like Malik Monk, I also think we may be underestimating his development here. This is a guy who, talent evaluators I've talked with really buy into what they saw from Mathurin as a creator with the ball in his hands and not just as a shooter. He's a really smart passer, showed some flashes as a playmaker this past season, kind of carrying Arizona to a #1 seed in the NCAA tournament. I think he has a really high ceiling as a dynamic 2 guard. In a vacuum, I would take Benedict Mathurin over Malik Monk. This would kind of be a disappointing career outcome if he turned out to be Malik Monk. But the shot, kind of how we've viewed Benedict Mathurin all along as kind of a sharpshooter, kind of reminds me a little bit of Benedict Mathurin and Malik Monk here.
Well, I cheated a little bit on this comparison because I was digging through NBA rosters last night trying to come up with a comparison for Benedict Mathurin and honestly couldn't find a good one. So I'm going with a throwback, and that's Michael Finley. Comparable size, athleticism, and shooting on the wing. Obviously, Finley went on to be an NBA All-Star. Honestly, I think Mathurin's got that kind of upside too. I mean, he's got a lot of intrigue right now because, as Kyle mentioned, he fits that 3-and-D profile. He's also comes to the game at a time where the big wing is in a lot of demand in today's NBA. And Mathurin, while he doesn't have quite as much size as advertised, he's big enough and he's long enough. He's also a high-level athlete. He's got that tremendous shooting ability. I think he's got a higher ceiling than people give him credit for right now. And that's why I went with the Michael Finley comparison, because I do think that Mathurin has both a high floor and a high long-term ceiling. Finley
went 21st overall back in 1995, a 2-time All-Star. We are comping our draft prospects 6 through 10 right now. We already had the guys do 1 through 5, and it's right now on our YouTube page, which you can go to, scanning the QR code that will pop on your screen. It'll direct you right there to watch our comps for our 1 through 5 prospects in the NBA draft, just a couple of days away. Let's move to Ochai Agbaji. Kyle, a rare 4-year player at Kansas who may end up in the lottery.
Yeah, I picked kind of an aspirational comp for Ochai Agbaji, and I went with Mikal Bridges. Mikal is, I think, inarguably one of the most dynamic defenders in the entire NBA. So if Ochai Agbaji is anywhere close to that, he's going to be a star, and I think will pay off whatever draft value you get him at. Ochai, though, is no slump on the defensive end of the floor. This is a guy who played for Bill Self for 4 years, a guy who absolutely demands perfection on the defensive of the floor. He really physically matured over his 4 years at Kansas. He improved every single year as a 3-point shooter. Last year was the #1 option on a Kansas team that went on to win the national championship, obviously. On offense, he's pretty crafty with the ball. I'm not entirely sure you can rely on him to be a creator at the next level. Mikal Bridges, is not necessarily that either. He's more of a 3-and-D type of player, and I think that's kind of the trajectory that Ochai Agbaji is on as well. A type of prospect who maybe doesn't profile as a star, but has the bona fides, I think, to be a solid role player just because of his ability to play on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, I like quite a bit of that. I went with Grayson Allen primarily because of the size. Agbaji, physically, he's more similar to someone like Grayson Allen. As Kyle said, he's got that 3-and-D prototype. Now, if you only watch Grayson Allen play at Duke, you'd say, what are you talking about? He didn't guard anybody. Well, he's kind of embraced that 3-and-D mentality in his NBA career with Milwaukee. He's evolved into more of a stopper. Agbaji's going to come in having embraced that mentality right away. He's going to be a 3-and-D guy from day one. He doesn't have the guard skills of Grayson Allen, but they have a similar pedigree, having played at the biggest stages of college basketball at blue blood programs, being exceptionally well prepared for the next level in that regard.
One more comp from you guys as we round out the top 10 here of our top players in the draft on Thursday. DYSON Daniels, Adam, likely to be the first player selected that did not play, or at least suit up for a college basketball team.
Yeah, the first product of the G League Ignite. And I tell you what, Chris, I did it again. I had to go with another throwback because you're talking about a multi-positional big guard who can really, really pass the ball, who can defend, but whose swing skill right now is his ability to knock down open shots. And for me, that just reminded me quite a bit of Sean Livingston, who had a huge reputation coming up out of high school. He battled some injuries that kind of derailed him, but then he came back and was at the forefront of Golden State's initial NBA championship run. And so to me, DYSON Daniels has a lot of those same attributes in terms of positional size, being multi-positional, the passing ability, not quite as shifty with his handle, doesn't have quite the same wiggle, but he's stronger than Livingston was. So the body type is different. But I think the game, in terms of the size, playmaking, passing ability, there's some similarities there.
Yeah, and I think the movement, the athleticism doesn't quite remind me of Sean Livingston, but a lot of aspects of his game I think comp very well to DYSON Daniels. I actually picked Lonzo Ball for my comp here. You know, Daniels is long, he's a defensive stalwart, especially on the ball. I think he's the most creative passer in this draft class, and we're projecting him right now to play on the wing. I think he can play on the ball as an NBA starting point guard eventually as he grows into his frame. He has some shades of Lonzo to his game in the sense that he's a really unique player. Tall, slender profile, you know, the questionable three-point shot coming out. Obviously, Lonzo Ball has, for the most part, always had a really reliable three-point shot. It's the mechanics that have always been the question. They've mostly translated for him at the NBA level. Daniels shot just around 25% from three at the G League Ignite last season. So that's an area that he needs to improve. But, you know, the passing, the defense, the high basketball IQ, I think is going to land him a long NBA career as kind of a connector type. He's very selfless with the ball in his hands. He's a versatile two-way player. And I think he can wear multiple hats for whichever NBA team he lands with.
We ranked him number 10, but his over-under draft position is 6.5. So maybe NBA teams thinking a little bit more highly of him, at least for his potential in the league, than some of our experts do. Fellas, thank you so much for the draft comps here on CBS Sports HQ. You can find them, if you missed 1 through 5, on our YouTube page, our CBS Sports HQ YouTube page. The draft is coming up on Thursday, and then a week from Thursday, free agency officially begins as we get into the summer and summer league beginning July the 7th.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.